Now, I've had lipedema all my life, as you probably have, because it's something you're born with. I'm only still now doing the deep dives into the extra bits and bobs that sort of live on the outskirts of lipedema that build on the things that we experience every day. That's simply because even though there's not a lot of research around lipedema as such, or it's quite limited to just certain things, like, for example, there's only about 8 different ways of treating it, sort of thing. That's fairly limited. However, the extra diseases that tend to coexist, or what's called comorbidities, like MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, and hypermobility and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and all of these other things that seem to travel hand in hand with lipedema, those things I've been really hesitant to dive into because I just didn't know enough about it. And I was like, what is this? Is this another thing that's going to stress me out? But a few things have come to play recently for me, and I'm like, okay, I need to look further into this and understand it in a way that I get it, right? Because things need to be simple. I need a big picture perspective of these sorts of things so that I can start to change my daily habits, perhaps what supplements I take, what kind of blood tests that I have done regularly so that I can keep a track of things and improve symptoms and improve day-to-day life, because that's what we all want, right? We want an easier day-to-day life, one where we feel good, we feel great about our body, no matter what it looks like. Okay, that's the point. That's the bottom line. And that's why I've decided it's time to dig a little deeper into MCAS, is what it's known as, mast cell activation syndrome. So I'm going to walk through 5 things that I didn't know about this, and maybe you don't know them. And if there's more things that you want to add to the comments, please contribute to the conversation. I would love for you to do that. So let's talk about number 1. MCAS is not an allergy. It is a reaction from our immune system. It's basically misfiring on us. So if you've got lots of allergies, or you think, I can't eat this and I can't eat that, or going outside causes hay fever and you're sneezing and all these sorts of things, then I would be looking to the immune system and the mast cell activation syndrome as to a potential part of that answer. So mast cells are found in our skin, our lymphatics, our gut, our blood vessels, and they're designed to protect us. That's what they're there for. But when they fire off and there's no actual threat, they release histamines every time they do, along with prostaglandins and cytokines. Cytokines are inflammatory responses. Okay, that's like the sciencey word for it. So if our body, our mast cells, are consistently setting off these fire alarms over and over and over again, and there's actually no real cause for alarm, that's when we have problems in our body, and that's when we develop this huge overload of histamines in our body. So the symptoms are so wide and varied with this, and no 2 people will look the same, which is why it's really hard to kind of diagnose, or it's not something that I suppose is reached for, because our symptoms can fall into so many different categories. You look at some of them: flushing, bloating, brain fog. That could be thyroid disease. That could be like any other autoimmune disease that you can name. Heart palpitations, anxiety, diarrhea. Again, that could fall under so many different categories of disease, okay? It's really important that we understand this for ourselves before we go, jumping through hoops to try and get a doctor to understand it and to diagnose it. Although the doctors do understand it, but it may not necessarily be connecting with your personal presentation of it. Number 2 thing that you didn't know about MCAS, or I should say I didn't know about MCAS, is that mast cells live in our lymphatic tissue. I did not know this. Those mast cells living in our lymphatics, they're angry and they're active. They're immunologically active. All right, a lot of people don't know this, that these mast cells sitting there, they're actually doing stuff, and they contribute to the inflammatory response that actually grows the lipedema and makes it worse. It causes quite an inflammatory environment in the lipedema tissues, which is probably one of the reasons why we have painful fat syndrome and bruising and all those kind of experiences with lipedema, because of this inflammatory cascade that we've got going on within the lymphatic tissue, potentially caused by the mast cells. So this kind of reframes lipedema. It changes it from a fat storage problem to an inflammatory tissue disorder. It's an inflammatory disease. I also have thyroid disease. So both diseases you could describe as an inflammatory disease. They both cause inflammation and they're made worse by inflammation, this spiral we've got going on. So if we think of the lipedema fat as not just being passive fat, but it is an inflammatory fat that is angry and looking for some way of causing some kind of destruction and, set fires within our lymphatic system. That's kind of what's going on with our mast cells. Thing number 3 I didn't know about MCAS is that our hormones are throwing fuel on the fire. What does that mean exactly? This is particularly relevant, or mostly relevant, for women of a certain age group that may be going through perimenopause, menopause, and the like. So let's talk about mast cells and some of the receptors they have on them, and they have estrogen receptors on there. And if we have got increased levels of estrogen, that makes the mast cells going a little bit out of control more easily triggered. And when they're triggered, we have histamine response. We have histamines let go in our body again. It can also cause progesterone fluctuations and cause unpredictable flare-ups of our symptoms. So this creates a vicious cycle. Lipedema fat stores excess estrogen. The excess estrogen activates the mast cells. Mast cells dump histamines, and histamines stimulates more estrogen production. This cycle, a horrible cycle for us. So testosterone and androgens actually have a stabilizing effect for us and on our mast cells. And that's why perimenopausal women and menopausal women often are hit hardest with MCAS and mast cells out of control, because we have lowered levels of testosterone and androgens. Okay, thing number 4, I did not know about mast cell activation syndrome, or MCAS, and lipedema. And this one explains the connection between some symptoms that you think are unrelated. So when we deal with reactions to anything, food, heat, environment, bacteria, any allergies, hay fevers, that kind of thing, what we're probably actually dealing with is an histamine intolerance, not so much an inflammatory response, although it is, but the actual guts of it is that we're reacting to the histamines in our body that are building up. So the symptoms that all come from the buildup of histamines are food intolerances. So any kind of food intolerances that you find you have, particularly if you eat the kind of foods that are high in histamines in the first place, like fermented foods, like, do you like charcuterie boards? That you can just call that a histamine board. Okay. Heat sensitivity is another one, and swelling in the warm weather. So if you can't cope with the heat, that kind of thing, that can be from histamines. Reactions to fragrances, chemicals, any kind of air fresheners and fabric softeners and perfumes and somebody's aftershave, all of those sorts of things, that can be a histamine problem. Gut issues, cramping, bloating, any kind of digestive disturbance, believe it or not, can be a histamine response. Anxiety, that wired but tired feeling, and I know I get this often. I'll be tired, sitting on the couch, ready to go to bed, and then I'll put my head down and my brain is switched on. So it's a wired but tired kind of feeling, can be a histamine response also. So these aren't random. These are all connected to the histamines in that loop. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's not so much that we're trying to, calm down the mast cells, although that's what the end result will be. I think what we kind of need to hone in on is this histamine response. And if we can kind of cut that off and calm that bit down, then the loop won't be so bad for us in everything else, and the mast cells being out of control and causing more issues, because that's kind of what we want to achieve, right? It's good to know that MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, and histamine intolerance also shows up in a lot of other connective tissue disorders like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, EDS, or POTS. I'm not going to read that one out, but if you've got POTS, you know you've got POTS. It's another comorbidity of lipedema. And these kind of all have impact when it comes to histamines. Okay, thing number 5 about mast cell activation syndrome and lipedema. You can do something about it. Right, this is the best one of all. You can do something about it. You don't need to be a victim to this loop, to the histamine response, to the mast cells being angry and wanting to burn everything down in our body. So what can we do? So the first thing we're going to do is identify the things in our world that could be contributing to the mast cells getting out of control and therefore dumping the histamine, right? So if it's things like excess estrogen, if it's things like fragrances, if it's histamine foods, you live on leftovers, also having leftovers in the fridge and eating it day in, day out, the histamines in those foods grow. So not having leftovers as well would be a big part of avoiding any kind of response in our mast cells. So identifying the triggers and removing them is probably the first step and the easiest step, yet the hardest step, because it's dependent on us. Nobody else is going to come in and say, look, I think this is going to be affecting you and remove it for you. It's up to us to go, all right, what things cause an issue with histamines? And I can start with that. Very simple. But it's not easy in so much as you might be addicted to your favorite perfume. You might be like, I'm not getting rid of all these products in my bathroom that, make everything smell pretty and look beautiful, because life's hard enough as it is. Okay, so we have to get through the head space and the emotional space to remove the things that are potentially triggering us. So simple but not easy. So don't forget also the food. So we've got all the fragrances and the things in the house that can be causing the histamine response. But yeah, eating in a different way that's not going to cause histamine response, or eating foods that aren't already loaded with histamines, that's kind of an easy way forward, right? Unless you're always doing charcuterie boards, then it may not be so easy for you. The next thing we need to do here is heal our gut, right? Gut health is all over the place, right? Everybody's talking about gut health that wants to talk about anything to do with health. Gut health's involved. But doesn't matter if you're on carnivore, keto, or any of these sorts of different things. There are so many gut healing protocols out there that help to reduce the inflammation in our guts. So one of the easiest things that we could probably do is bone broth. I remember going to a conference many years ago, and it was a doctor speaking about gut health, and he said that the quickest by far thing that he had ever found to heal the gut was bone broth. So maybe that's your way forward, particularly if you're on a carnivore or keto diet. That doesn't impact any other kind of way that you eat. So that would probably be a really good option for gut healing. The next thing is having an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. If things are inflammatory to you, we kind of know this. We just kind of avoid it and put the blinkers on because life's not fun with lipedema. So we kind of like, oh, I don't care. I'm going to have the thing, or I'm going to do the thing, even though we know it may cause us inflammation and we may pay for it for a couple of days afterwards. We do it, but the only way to mitigate this cascade and this loop of inflammation in our body is to actually put our big girl panties on and sort of go, oh, you know what? I really want it, but I'm not going to have it because it's going to cause inflammation, and I need to sort of cut that cycle. So having a low inflammatory diet, and that can be the food, the histamines, the products that we use. There's so many different ways of looking at inflammation, and it'll be different for all of us. So I can only look at what's inflammatory to me, and you can only look at what's inflammatory to you and start to remove them one by one. The other thing that we can do, and that I'm already mostly doing, is bring in some supplements that support our mast cells and keep them sort of calm. And vitamin C, I've mentioned that quite a few times. I do my vitamin C drink every single morning on an empty stomach. Vitamin C is one of the best things that you can do to lower this issue, but also other things like quercetin, bioflavonoids, that kind of thing will also help. But vitamin C is an easy reach. Most people can do it. It's not that expensive. I have mine every single morning, have done for 9 months. And the knock-on effect for that is that I haven't been sick in like 9 months. I have not been sick since I moved to Thailand. There's been a few moments of, oh, am I getting something? Is there something? Am I getting a tickle? But I think after researching MCAS, I think that the couple of times that that's happened for me, it's simply been like a hay fever, like an allergy kind of response to things, because it always goes away. Like I haven't actually fallen ill. And that's even with street food, right? So that's the side effect. Even though I'm talking about mast cells here and keeping them stable, the knock-on effect for the vitamin C, which I have every morning on an empty stomach to keep the upper gut tract sterile, that's what it's for. Dr. Sarah I really must find out her name and so that I can tell you all the time. As a side effect, neither of us, my husband or myself, have ever had any kind of food issues or, diarrhea or anything like that since we've arrived. And I put it down to the vitamin C. So the vitamin C for the mast cells, but also just for health in general. So that was 5 things that I didn't know about MCAS. And that was my starting point of understanding mast cell activation syndrome and what it has to do with lipedema and why it's potentially affecting me. Let's recap them. It's your immune system misfiring. Mast cells are part of our immune system and they're misfiring. They're angry, they're on the warpath, and they want to be heard. Thing number 2 is that lipedema fat is not passive. It contains mast cells, right? So anywhere that we've got issues going on, we've got to look at our mast cells. Number 3, your hormones are throwing fuel on the fire. So the estrogen is causing this loop. So the more that our estrogen levels are out of control. Thing number 4, the MCAS lipedema connection explains how symptoms are connected. Foods, heat, reactions, gut issues, anxiety, they're all connected through mast cells. And finally, thing number 5, you can actually do something about it. So reduce your load, remove triggers, low histamine eating, support your gut, hormone awareness and where your estrogen levels are at, which will help both the mast cells and lipedema. And keeping an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. That's probably one of the biggest things that we need to do because everything else falls under that umbrella, right? Anything that's causing any problems with mast cells or estrogen out of control or excess seed oils or any of these things, they basically boil down to increasing inflammation in the body, and that's a problem for us. I hope you found this really little deep dive into MCAS as fascinating as I did, and I'm now looking at it from a much more relevant perspective than I did before. It was one of those things, it was too much for me to get my head around. Sometimes you've got to get your head around just the lipedema fact, and then you can add on the other comorbidities if you think they're relevant to you, and then do the deep dive into that. And so now I'm at the mast cell deep dive stage of my journey. Not sure where you're at. You may have already done this deep dive and taken care of the things that you need to take care of. So please share that with me down below if you have. And that's it for me.